They took me on my 9th birthday. I remember the taste of snow on my tongue. Real snow, not the ashfall that came later, and the way my mother's hand felt when she let go. She didn't fight them. No one fought the chaplain when he walked through our hive sector with his scanner, pausing at certain boys, reading whatever genetic markers the Imperium had decided made us suitable. My designation at that moment was Cale Merison, son of a munitions worker, born in the lower industrial quarters of Hive Tertius on a world whose name I would later be taught to forget. The chaplain's armor was the color of dried blood. I fixated on a single detail. There was a purity seal hanging from his pauldron, and the wax had cracked in a pattern that looked like a face screaming. I would see that pattern again, many times, in many places. The transport ship smelled like promethium and the particular staleness of air that has been recycled through the same scrubbers for decades. There were 43 of us in that intake group. I remember this number with absolute certainty because I counted them repeatedly during the 3-week journey. We were not yet aspirants. We were raw material awaiting processing. They gave us grey tunics and shaved our heads and assigned us to bunks in a cargo hold that had previously housed agricultural equipment. The walls still bore the scratches where machinery had been secured. At night, when the ship's engines cycled down to minimum thrust, I could hear the boy in the bunk above me crying. His name was Davin. He was 8 years old. He told me he had been taken from his father's forge, where he had been learning to shape metal. He showed me his hands, already calloused, already scarred from hot work. I was going to be a smith, he said. I observed the way he used past tense. He understood even then what had been taken. The fortress monastery appeared first as a dark mass against darker sky. Our world, I will not name it, because they taught us not to think of it as ours, was perpetually shrouded in storm systems that the tech priests said were the result of ancient terraforming that had failed to complete. Lightning provided the only illumination as we descended. The fortress had been carved from a mountain range that predated human settlement. Gothic architecture rose in spires and buttresses that served no structural purpose I could identify. Later, I understood. They were designed to make us feel small. The Imperium builds its institutions at a scale intended to crush individual significance. It was working before we even landed. They separated us immediately, not randomly. There was purpose in how they divided the 43 into groups of 7 and 8. I was placed in a cohort with Davin and 5 others whose names I still retain in archive: Marcus, Ton, Kellen, Joseph, and Grendel. We were marched through corridors where the walls were carved with battle scenes depicting Astartes killing things I had no names for: Xenos, heretics, traitors, the categories of death the Imperium recognized. Our boots echoed on stone floors that had been worn smooth by centuries of other boots. How many others had walked this path? The chaplain who processed our intake logged us into a data system that hummed with machine spirit presence. I watched him input our designations. The screen flickered. For a moment, I saw the scroll of names above ours. Thousands of entries, each with a date of intake, and a second date I did not yet understand was termination. The first night, they placed us in cells. Not punishment. Evaluation. Each cell measured 3 meters by 2 meters. Stone walls. A single luminous strip in the ceiling that emitted light at a frequency that made sleep difficult. A waste reclamation unit in the corner. No beds. We were expected to sleep on the floor. Through the walls, I could hear breathing. Davin was in the cell to my left. I pressed my hand against the stone and felt its coldness. I tried to remember what warmth felt like. My mother's hand. The forge heat Davin had described. Already, the memories were becoming less distinct. I did not yet know this was intentional, that the cells were kept at 11 degrees Celsius, specifically because cold impairs memory consolidation. The Imperium was teaching us to forget who we had been, 1 degree at a time. Morning arrived without warning. The luminous strip brightened to painful intensity. A tone sounded, single note, 800 hertz, sustained for 10 seconds. The cell door opened. We were given 30 seconds to exit and form ranks in the corridor. Davin stumbled out of his cell with his eyes still adjusting. Grendel moved too slowly. A servitor, my first encounter with what a human being could become, struck him across the shoulders with a shock maul set to minimum charge. Grendel made a sound I archived as educational. Pain processed through the understanding that screaming would accomplish nothing. We learned to move quickly. The first month was cataloging. They measured us. Height, weight, bone density, muscle composition, organ function, neural response time, pain threshold. This last test involved electrodes attached to our skin and steadily increasing current. They did not tell us the purpose. They simply watched our faces and logged the results. I lasted to 47 milliamps before involuntary vocalization began. Davin lasted to 53. Marcus broke at 31 and was removed from our group. We did not see him again. I understood then that we were being sorted according to criteria we could not see. Some metric of acceptability that divided the suitable from the unsuitable. The unsuitable disappeared. Where they went, we were not told. I developed a hypothesis. Servitor conversion. The Imperium wastes nothing. They fed us precisely 2,400 calories daily, divided across 4 meals of nutrient paste dispensed from industrial processors. The paste was gray. It had no distinct flavor, a vague saltiness, a texture like wet clay. We ate with our hands from metal bowls that retained the cold of whatever storage they had been kept in. I learned to eat quickly. Davin could not. He ate slowly, methodically, as though he were still at his father's table, as though manners still meant something. On the 16th day, a chaplain struck the bowl from his hands mid-meal. "You are not dining," the chaplain said. "You are refueling. Understand the difference." Davin nodded. He did not retrieve the spilled paste. The servitors cleaned it during the next cycle. Davin learned to eat quickly. Physical conditioning began in the second month. We ran. Distances I could not measure accurately because they did not tell us the course length, but my legs archived the data. Pain in the joints after 8 kilometers. Systemic fatigue after 15, complete muscle failure after 22. We ran until we collapsed. Then we were given 10 minutes of rest and ran again. Davin collapsed on the 3rd day. He vomited the gray paste onto the stone floor and could not stand. A Medicae servitor approached with a syringe filled with stimulant compound. I later learned it was a derivative of adrenaline mixed with pain suppressors and a mild neurotoxin that damaged the body's ability to recognize its own limits. They injected Davin directly into his heart. He stood. His pupils dilated to the point where his eyes appeared entirely black. He ran another 8 kilometers before his heart stopped. They revived him. I watched the Medicae work with instruments I had no names for. Electrical shock to reset cardiac rhythm. A second injection, different compound, administered to his neck. Davin's body convulsed. He inhaled sharply, a sound like metal scraping metal. His heart restarted. The Medicae logged the incident and moved to the next casualty. There were 4 others who had collapsed during that session. 3 were revived. The 4th was not. His body was removed by servitors who handled flesh with the same efficiency they handled equipment. We were not told his name during any memorial. There was no memorial. We returned to the barracks and slept for 6 hours and resumed conditioning the next morning. Davin did not speak about dying. I observed that he touched his chest frequently, fingers pressed against his sternum as though confirming his heart was still beating. The instructor who oversaw our combat training was a veteran sergeant who had lost his left arm and both legs in a campaign I was not given details about. He had been augmented with crude bionics that clicked when he moved. His face was burn-scarred on one side, flesh pulled tight and shiny where it had been regrafted. He did not tell us his name. We called him Instructor. He taught us to kill with our hands before they gave us weapons. Pressure points, joint manipulation, how to collapse a trachea, how to rupture organs. We practiced on servitors first, deactivated units that could not feel or respond. Then we practiced on each other. Tom broke Joseph's arm during a grappling drill. I heard the bone snap, a sound distinct from any other, sharp and wet simultaneously. Joseph did not cry out. He held his arm at an angle that was obviously wrong and looked to the instructor for guidance. The instructor observed the break, noted the angle, and said, "Functional?" Joseph attempted to move his fingers. 3 of them responded. "Functional," the instructor confirmed. "Continue." Joseph fought the remainder of the session one-handed. The Medicae reset the bone that evening. They did not use anesthetic. Joseph was expected to remain still while they worked. I watched his face. He processed the pain by counting in a whisper, numbers from 1 to 100, then starting again. When the Medicae finished, Joseph's arm was locked in a brace made of plasteel and synthetic ligament. He was returned to training the next morning. The arm healed incorrectly. Joseph's left hand never regained full dexterity. This did not disqualify him. The Imperium required warriors, not musicians. They introduced the concept of the Emperor in our 3rd month, not as theology, as operational framework. We were assembled in a chapel carved from the same mountain stone as everything else. The walls were covered in murals depicting the Great Crusade, the Siege of Terra, battles I had no context for. At the front of the chapel stood a statue of the Emperor, 3 meters tall, worked in bronze that had oxidized to green in places. His face was stern. His eyes were blank. We were taught to kneel before this statue and recite the Catechism of Compliance. I am flesh given purpose. I am will directed by his vision. I am the weapon that strikes in his name. We repeated these words until they became automatic. I observed that repetition degrades meaning. The words became sounds, the sounds became routine. Routine became ritual. I performed the ritual because the ritual was required. Davin asked a question during one of these sessions. "Does the Emperor hear us?" The chaplain who was leading the prayer turned to face him. The silence extended. I counted 6 seconds before the chaplain responded. "The Emperor does not listen for individual voices among billions. You are not asking to be heard. You are confirming your function." Davin nodded. I do not know if he understood. I understood. We were components being programmed with their operational parameters. Faith was the language the programming used. The first surgical intervention occurred in our 4th month. They called it preliminary augmentation. We were sedated, not fully, because they needed us conscious enough to confirm neural response, but enough to dampen panic. I was secured to a surgical table in a Medicae facility that smelled of disinfectant and the particular chemical odor of cauterized flesh. A tech priest approached with instruments I tried to catalog: a bone drill, a syringe array, subcutaneous injectors, and device I could not identify that emitted a low humming sound. "We will begin with the secondary heart," the tech priest said, not to me, to the data slate he was updating. I was not participant in this conversation. I was subject. They opened my chest without anesthetic for the pain. This was explained to me as I watched the scalpel approach. Pain tolerance is a parameter we are measuring. Your response informs the viability assessment. I felt the blade enter below my sternum. The sensation was not what I expected. Less sharp, more pressure. A feeling like something was being pulled apart inside me. I could not see the procedure. My head was locked in position, facing the ceiling. But I could feel everything. Hands inside my chest cavity, metal instruments scraping against bone. The distinct sensation of something foreign being placed inside me, positioned against my original heart, connected to vasculature through methods I could not perceive but felt as pulling, stitching pressure. The tech priest provided narration for his data logs. Primary anchoring complete. Vascular integration proceeding. Subject is conscious. Neural response within acceptable parameters. I did not scream. This was not courage. This was calculation. I had observed what happened to those who failed parameters. I processed the pain by converting it to data. This hurts at intensity level 7. This hurts at intensity level 9. This is the worst thing I have ever felt. Archived as new baseline. The procedure lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. I tracked time by counting my original heart's beats. They did not tell me when the secondary heart was activated. I simply felt a second pulse begin, slightly offset from the first, a rhythm that was immediately wrong. My body tried to reject it. Fever spiked to 40 degrees Celsius within 6 hours. They did not treat the fever. They observed it. I was kept in the Medicaid ward for 4 days while my body decided whether to accept or reject the foreign organ. Davin was in the bed next to mine. His procedure had been the same. We did not speak. We simply existed in parallel states of controlled agony while our bodies adapted or failed to adapt. 7 members of our intake group died during the secondary heart implantation. Their bodies rejected the organ. Catastrophic immune response. I watched one of them die in the bed across from mine. Convulsions, blood from his mouth and nose, his skin turning gray as his circulatory system collapsed. The Medicaid did not attempt intervention once rejection was confirmed. They logged the failure and removed the body. Another boy was brought in to fill the empty bed. The cycle continued. By the 6th month, I had stopped thinking of my body as mine. It was infrastructure undergoing renovation. The secondary heart had integrated successfully. I felt its presence as constant wrongness, a rhythm I had not chosen, beating parallel to the original. They did not give us time to adjust. The surgical interventions continued according to a schedule I was not shown. Week 23, Osmodular Implantation. The tech priest who performed this procedure explained it with the detachment of someone describing a mechanical process. Your skeletal structure is insufficient for the force loads you will be required to sustain. We will introduce an organ that secretes hormone compounds to reinforce bone density and enable ceramite integration. The process will take approximately 18 months. It will be painful. Painful was insufficient terminology. They implanted the osmodular at the base of my spine, a biological factory that began secreting compounds directly into my bone marrow. Within 2 weeks, my skeleton began to change. I felt it as deep ache that had no relief position. Lying down hurt. Standing hurt. Movement hurt. The pain lived in my bones like something trying to crack its way out from inside. Davin described it as feeling like his skeleton was dissolving. He was not wrong. Our bones were being broken down and rebuilt at the cellular level, reinforced with mineral compounds and prepared for ceramite bonding that would come later. Several aspirants began screaming during sleep cycles, unconscious vocalizations their sleeping minds could not suppress. The servitors did not wake them. The screaming was logged as normal response to the process. During this period, they increased our physical conditioning to what the instructor called accelerated integration protocol. We were forced to run, to fight, to lift weights that our restructuring skeletons should not have been able to support. The logic was explained in simple terms. Stress accelerates adaptation. Bones reinforced under load integrate more successfully than bones reinforced at rest. 3 aspirants sustained compound fractures during this phase. I watched Kellen's femur snap during a weighted march. The bone punctured through his skin, white fragment visible through blood. He collapsed. The Medici set the bone without removing him from the training ground. They injected him with the same stimulant compound they had used on Davin months before, and ordered him to continue. Kellen walked another 4 kilometers on a broken leg that had been temporarily stabilized with an external brace. When the march ended, they performed corrective surgery. Kellen's leg healed stronger than it had been. The fracture had accelerated the osmodular's integration. I filed this observation. The system rewards breaking. Month 8 brought the Biscopia implantation, the organ responsible for muscle mass enhancement. This procedure was performed on 41 aspirants simultaneously in a surgical theater that had been converted from what appeared to have once been a chapel. We were arranged on tables in rows. I could see the aspirant to my left and right. The tech priests moved between us with the efficiency of factory workers on an assembly line. This was manufacture, not medicine. The Biscopia was implanted in my chest cavity, positioned between my 2 hearts. I felt the incision, felt the organ placed, felt the connections made to my endocrine system. The pain was familiar by now. I had learned to compartmentalize it, to observe it happening to my body without fully identifying with the body it was happening to. Davin was 3 tables away. I could not see his face, but I could hear his breathing, controlled, measured. He had also learned to process rather than experience. The Biscopia's effects were immediate and violent. Within days, my muscle mass began to increase, at a rate my skeletal system, still undergoing osmodular reinforcement, struggled to support. I gained 14 kilograms in the first month. The weight felt wrong, distributed across a frame that had been designed for a different proportion. Moving required recalibration. I knocked objects over because my spatial awareness had not adjusted to my new reach. I misjudged my own strength and damaged equipment during training. The instructor did not accept these explanations. Your body is changing. Your mind must change faster. Adapt or fail. I adapted. We all adapted, those of us who survived. Not all survived. Grendel's body rejected the Biscopia through a mechanism the Medicae described as catastrophic hormone cascade. His endocrine system began producing growth compounds without regulation. I watched him swell over the course of 3 days, muscle tissue growing faster than his blood supply could support. He developed necrotic patches on his arms and legs where tissue had outpaced vascularization. He could not speak by the end. His throat had thickened to the point where his airway was compromised. They terminated him as a mercy. The Medicae injected him with something that stopped his hearts. Both of them, simultaneously. His body was removed. We were not given time to observe his absence. Training continued. Month 11, the hemastamen implantation, designed to enhance blood production and efficiency. This organ was smaller than the others, barely the size of my thumb, but its integration was among the most complex. They placed it in my neck, connected directly to my carotid artery. The surgery was performed with me fully conscious. I could not move my head. I could feel the tech priest's hands at my throat, feel the incision, feel the installation. Do not swallow, he instructed. I did not swallow. The organ activated within hours. My blood changed. I could feel it, a thickness, a heat, something moving through my veins that was not what had been there before. The Medicae drew samples daily. They showed me the vials. My blood was darker now, more viscous, with a faint chemical odor I recognized from the Prometheum stores. I was becoming fuel for a different kind of engine. The psychological conditioning intensified in parallel with physical transformation. They introduced us to the concept of the chapter, the organization we would become part of if we survived. We were shown the iconography, a clenched fist holding a blade, rendered in silver on a field of black. We were taught the chapter's battle cry, its litanies, its history of campaigns spanning centuries. We were expected to memorize the names of companies, of notable heroes, of battles won at costs measured in percentages of total chapter strength. I observed that every story we were told ended in victory, but the victory was always expensive. The Imperium won by spending lives until the enemy had none left to spend. We were being taught that our lives were currency. The only question was whether we would be spent efficiently. Davin began to change during this period in ways that were not physiological. He spoke less. When he did speak, his vocabulary had shifted toward the litanies we had been taught. Personal pronouns appeared less frequently. He referred to himself in third person on 2 occasions. The aspirant will comply. The aspirant requests clarification. Before catching himself, I mentioned this to him during a rare moment of unsupervised time in the barracks. "You're speaking like them," I said. He looked at me with an expression I could not categorize. Not anger, not confusion. Something flatter. "Isn't that the purpose?" he asked. I had no response that did not confirm his statement. We were being reprogrammed. Language was one of the protocols being overwritten. Month 14 brought the Laraman's organ, a tiny implant placed near my stomach that would allow my blood to coagulate almost instantly at wound sites. The surgery was routine by this point. I had stopped counting the number of times I had been opened. My torso was a map of scars, long lines where they had cut, small punctures where they had inserted, irregular patches where tissue had rejected and been replaced. The Larriman's organ integrated without complication. They tested its function by making an incision on my forearm and observing the result. The bleeding stopped within seconds. A thick, waxy substance formed over the wound. Not quite scab, not quite scar. Functional, efficient, inhuman. I archived the observation. I was bleeding things that did not look like human blood anymore. The catalepsian node came in month 16. This implantation was different from the others because it altered consciousness rather than physiology. They placed the organ at the base of my brain, a procedure that required drilling through my skull. I was awake. I had to be. They needed to monitor neural response in real time to ensure they were not damaging critical systems. I felt the drill enter my skull. The sensation was pressure and vibration, and a sound that resonated through my entire skeleton. Then I felt nothing, a numbness that spread from the drilling site across my scalp. The tech priest worked inside my skull for what my time sense suggested was 40 minutes, but could have been longer. Time became unreliable when they were working on my brain. When the installation was complete, they sealed my skull with a bonding compound and informed me of the organ's purpose. You will no longer require conventional sleep. The catalepsian node allows portions of your brain to rest while others remain active. You can sustain consciousness indefinitely with only brief rest cycles for specific neural regions. They were correct. I stopped sleeping, or rather, I stopped experiencing sleep as cessation of awareness. I would enter a state where my body rested but my mind continued processing. I observed the barracks at night in ways I had not been able to before. The sounds of other aspirants in their own rest cycles, the patrol patterns of the servitors, the way the fortress settled as temperature dropped during night hours. Davin adapted to the catalepsian node differently than I did. He entered rest state and remained motionless for hours, eyes open, breathing slowed to minimal rate. He looked dead. I checked his pulse once to confirm he was not. The pulse was there, both hearts beating in their offset rhythm, slow but steady. When I asked him what he experienced during these states, he said, "Nothing. I think of nothing. It's preferable to thinking." Month 19. The preomnor implantation, placed in my throat to neutralize ingested toxins. Month 20. 1. The omophagia, installed in my spinal cord, designed to allow me to gain memories and knowledge by consuming genetic material. This organ disturbed me in ways the others had not. The purpose was explained with clarity. You will be able to eat the flesh or drink the blood of enemies and extract information from their genetic structure. Battlefield intelligence gathering. They tested the organ's function by having us consume tissue samples from deceased subjects. I was not told if they were human, xenos, or something else. I placed the tissue in my mouth. It had no taste. Within minutes, I experienced something that was not memory, but felt like memory. Flashes of images, sensations, emotional states that were not mine. They lasted only seconds before degrading, but in those seconds I knew things I had not known, where the subject had been, what they had seen. The organ worked. I archived my reaction, horror and recognition. This was what consumption meant in the literal sense. The Imperium consumed everything, even identity, even memory, and reprocessed it as resource. Davin ate the tissue sample they gave him and showed no visible reaction. When I asked him if he had experienced the memory transfer, he said yes. When I asked what he had seen, he said, "Nothing important. Information. Data." He would not elaborate. I observed that he had classified memories, someone else's memories, as data. The distinction between experience and information had collapsed. He was no longer processing events as things that happened to consciousness. He was archiving phenomena without subjective reference point. I wondered if I was doing the same thing and simply had not noticed. By month 2003, 19 of us remained from the original 43. The others had died during surgical complications, during training accidents, during trials I was not always present for. The 19 who remained were no longer recognizable as the boys who had been taken from hive sectors and forge worlds and agricultural settlements. We had gained an average of 40 kilograms each. Our proportions were wrong. Too much muscle, bones too thick, features distorted by growth. We no longer fit in the bunks we had been assigned initially. They moved us to larger quarters designed for aspirants in late-stage transformation. The new quarters had reinforced furniture, wider doors, higher ceilings. We were being housed according to what we were becoming, rather than what we had been. The mucranoid organ came in month 2004, a small implant in my skin that would allow me to secrete a waxy protective coating in response to vacuum or toxic atmosphere. The neuroglottis followed in month 26, enhancing my ability to taste and smell, to the point where I could identify chemical compounds by traces in the air. Each implantation brought new capabilities and new alienation from baseline human experience. I could taste the fierce sweat of other aspirants during training. I could smell the ozone discharge of power weapons from 3 corridors away. I could secrete a coating that made my skin look like it had been dipped in wax when exposed to low-pressure environments. These were not enhancements. These were replacements. Every new organ removed something human and installed something else. Month 28 brought the first of the truly major implantations, the multi-lung. This required opening my entire chest cavity and installing a third lung designed to function in toxic atmospheres and underwater. The surgery took 8 hours. I was conscious for all of it. I watched in a reflection placed above the surgical table, saw my chest opened, saw my rib cage spread with mechanical separators, saw the tech priests working inside me with the precision of craftsmen assembling a machine. When they installed the multi-lung and activated it, I felt a new rhythm join the 2 hearts, a different kind of expansion and contraction. A third bellows cycling air through filtration systems that had not existed in my body before. The first breath I took with the multi-lung was wrong. Too much air processed too efficiently, my blood oxygenation spiking to levels that made me dizzy. They did not stabilize me. They watched. Adjust, the tech priest said. I adjusted. My body learned to regulate the 3-lung system. Within days, the dizziness passed. Within weeks, I forgot what breathing had felt like before. Tom did not survive the multi-lung implantation. His body rejected the organ through an immune response the Medicaid could not suppress. I watched him drown in his own blood, as his lungs, all 3 of them, filled with fluid his body was producing faster than it could be extracted. They did not attempt to save him once the rejection cascade began. They simply logged the failure and removed his body. I had known Tom for 28 months. We had trained together, bled together, been transformed together. His death was recorded as data point in the surgical success rate calculations. 82% of aspirants survived multi-lung implantation. Tom was part of the 18% that did not. The percentage was considered acceptable. Davin survived his multi-lung surgery. I visited him in the Medicaid ward during his recovery period. He was sitting upright in his bed, breathing with a rhythm I recognized as the 3-lung pattern. "Can you feel it?" I asked. "The new one?" He nodded. "It feels like drowning, except you never die. You just keep breathing." I understood exactly what he meant. We sat in silence for several minutes. Then Davin said something I archived as significant. "I don't remember my father's face anymore. I can remember the forge. I can remember the tools. But when I try to see his face, there's nothing there. Just blank space." I told him I still remembered my mother's face. This was a lie. I had lost her features months before. I retained only abstract information. She had been there. She had been warm. She had let go of my hand. But the specific details, eye color, facial structure, the exact sound of her voice, were corrupted files I could no longer access. I lied to Davin because I understood he needed to believe someone still retained connection to the people we had been. It was the last kindness I was capable of offering. Month 32-1. The oculobi implantation, restructuring my eyes to enhance vision across multiple spectra. They replaced my corneas, rebuilt my retinas, installed neural interfaces that would allow me to perceive infrared and ultraviolet. The surgery required removing my eyes completely, modifying them on a workbench while I lay with empty sockets, then reinstalling them. I was conscious. I heard the wet sound of my eyes being lifted from their sockets. I experienced the void of blindness. Then, after modifications I could not see being performed, I felt them placed back. They did not fit correctly at first. The connections had to be adjusted, calibrated. The tech priest worked for 3 hours making microscopic adjustments while asking me what I could perceive. Light, I said. Shapes. Colors that aren't colors. Gradually, vision returned, but it was not the vision I had known. I saw heat signatures. I saw the ultraviolet spectrum. I saw the electromagnetic fields generated by the fortress's power systems. The world was layered now, multiple realities stacked on top of each other, all visible simultaneously. I had to learn to filter the inputs, to decide which spectrum to prioritize. It took weeks before I could navigate without disorientation. The lineman's ear came in month 33, restructuring my hearing to perceive frequencies beyond human range and to filter out deafening noise. They opened my skull again, accessed my auditory processing centers, installed filters and enhancers directly into my neural tissue. When the surgery was complete, I heard everything. The electrical hum of power conduits in the walls, the ultrasonic frequencies the servitors used to communicate with each other, the subsonic vibrations of the fortress settling on its foundations. I heard Davin's 2 hearts from across the training hall, the specific rhythm of his offset pulses, slightly different from mine. I heard the instructor's bionic limbs clicking with each movement, a pattern of sounds that revealed which components were degrading and would soon require maintenance. The sensory input was overwhelming until I learned to suppress it, to hear selectively, to categorize sounds into relevant and irrelevant categories and discard the irrelevant without conscious processing. Month 36 marked 3 years since intake. Of the original 43, 11 of us remained. We were no longer boys. We were no longer entirely human. We had become transitional beings, too augmented to return to baseline human existence, not yet complete as Astartes. They assembled us in a chapel and informed us we had reached the midpoint of the transformation process. The chaplain who addressed us did not congratulate us. He simply stated facts. You have survived the primary organ implantations. 63% of aspirants fail before this point. You are the 37%. Your survival indicates genetic compatibility and psychological resilience. You will now enter the secondary phase. The secondary phase has a 41% survival rate. You should not expect to see each other at the completion ceremony. The Emperor requires warriors. Whether you become warriors or casualties is a function of your value to him. The secondary phase began with the sus and membrane implantation, an organ placed in my brain that would allow me to enter suspended animation if mortally wounded. The surgery was routine by this point. They opened my skull, installed the organ, sealed the opening. The sus and membrane's function was tested by inducing a near-death state through controlled blood loss. They drained my blood until my consciousness began to fade. I felt the organ activate, a sensation like falling into a void where time stopped. I existed in that state for what I later learned was 14 hours. I experienced it as timeless nothing. When they revived me with blood transfusion and stimulant injection, I was informed the test was successful. The organ had preserved my brain function despite catastrophic blood loss. I filed the observation. I could now survive dying, as long as someone eventually decided to revive me. Month 39 brought the melochrome organ, altering my skin to provide protection against radiation. My skin darkened over the course of weeks, took on a toughness that was not quite scales but no longer resembled human skin texture. I looked at my hands and did not recognize them. They were tools, implements, no longer the hands that had touched snow on my 9th birthday. Those hands belonged to someone who no longer existed. The urolitic kidney came in month 41, a replacement for my original kidneys, designed to filter toxins more efficiently and to extract moisture from any fluid source. They removed my human kidneys and installed the enhanced organ. The recovery was complicated. My body's fluid regulation went haywire for several days while the new kidney learned to interface with my existing systems. I alternated between severe dehydration and fluid retention. The medici monitored but did not intervene. Adaptation must occur organically, they stated. My body adapted. It had no choice. Month 44. The neuroglottis reached full integration, enhancing my taste and smell to post-human sensitivity. I could identify individuals by scent alone. I could taste the chemical composition of air and determine what weapons had been fired in a room hours before. I could no longer eat the nutrient paste they fed us without tasting every synthetic compound, every preservative, every trace of the machinery it had been processed through. Food became data rather than sustenance. Joseph died in month 46, not during surgery. During training, we were conducting live fire exercises with bolters, our first exposure to the weapons we would eventually carry as full astartes. Joseph's weapon malfunctioned. The bolt detonated in the chamber. The explosion removed his head and upper torso. I was standing 3 meters away. I was covered in his blood. I tasted his genetic material on my lips. The homophagia activated involuntarily. I experienced Joseph's final moments through the genetic memory his blood carried. Terror, pain, confusion. Then nothing. The memory transfer lasted 5 seconds. Then Joseph was simply data in my neural archive, a person reduced to stored information. The medici cleaned the training ground. We continued the exercise. I fired 240 bolter rounds that day. My accuracy rating was 87%. Joseph's death was not mentioned again. By month 48, we were 7. Davin, Kellen, Marcus, who had rejoined us from some medical intervention I had not been briefed on, and 4 others whose names I retain but whose faces had become interchangeable. We were becoming identical. The surgical modifications, the muscle growth, the bone reinforcement, all of it was pushing us toward a standardized template. Individual features were being erased. We were becoming copies of an ideal that existed only in the chapter's genetic specifications. Month 50, one brought the Phase 7 trial, ceramite bonding. This was not a single surgery. This was a process that would take months. They began with my rib cage. They opened my chest. I had stopped counting how many times this had been done, and began fusing ceramite plating directly to my bones. The process involved drilling into bone, inserting ceramite rods, allowing them to integrate, then adding layers. Each layer required healing time. Each layer brought pain that the medicae monitored but did not alleviate. Pain confirms integration, they explained. Absence of pain indicates nerve death, which indicates failed bonding. I was kept in pain deliberately, systematically, for months while my skeleton was slowly encased in armor that would never be removed. The ceramite bonding extended to my limbs, my arms, my legs, my skull. They reinforced my skeleton until I weighed 140 kilograms even without armor. I had weighed 34 kilograms at intake. I had quadrupled my mass. Most of that mass was bone reinforcement and muscle enhancement. I was becoming a weapon shaped like a person. Davin underwent the same process in parallel. I would see him in the medicae ward, his chest opened, ceramite rods visible protruding from his rib cage. We did not speak during these sessions. We simply existed in adjacent states of controlled agony. Kellen died during ceramite bonding. His body rejected the foreign material through an immune response that caused his bones to begin dissolving around the ceramite implants. I watched him deteriorate over a period of days, his bones literally liquefying while the ceramite rods remained solid. He screamed constantly toward the end. The medici sedated him only when the screaming began to disturb other patients' procedures. When his spine dissolved, he lost all motor function but remained conscious. The sus and membrane did not activate because he was not technically dying, just failing. They terminated him on the 4th day. His body was removed, the ceramite rods were extracted and sterilized for reuse. The Imperium wastes nothing. Month 65, the black carapace implantation. This was the final major surgery, the procedure that would determine whether we became space marines or died as aspirants who had almost succeeded. The black carapace was a synthetic skin layer installed directly beneath our natural skin, covering most of our torso and portions of our limbs. It would interface with power armor, allowing us to control the armor as naturally as our own bodies. The installation required removing large sections of skin, placing the carapace layer, then grafting the skin back over it. The surgery took 14 hours per aspirant. I was kept conscious for portions of it so they could test the neural interface connectivity in real time. When the black carapace was installed and my skin grafted back into place, I looked at my torso in a reflection and saw something that was no longer human. The carapace was visible beneath my skin as a dark pattern, like circuitry, like roots, like infection spreading across my entire chest and back. Connection ports had been installed at strategic points: shoulders, spine, ribs. These ports would link to power armor. Without armor attached, they were simply holes in my body, covered with sterile plugs. I was an incomplete machine waiting for my external components. Davin survived the black carapace implantation. So did Marcus. So did 3 others. We were 6. We had started as 43, 86% casualty rate. The chaplain informed us this was within expected parameters. We had not failed. The system had simply consumed the inadequate and refined the acceptable. We were what remained after the Imperium's digestive process had extracted everything of value. The final phase was not surgery, it was indoctrination. They had rebuilt our bodies over 68 months. Now they would rebuild our minds. We were placed in isolation chambers, individual cells where we would spend the next several months in hypno-conditioning. The cell I was assigned measured 3 meters by 3 meters, stone walls, a single chair in the center, manacles attached to the chair for physical restraint, a projection system that would display imagery and transmit audio directly into my enhanced hearing. I was secured to the chair. I was informed I would remain there until the conditioning process was complete. "How long will that take?" I asked. The tech priest securing my restraints did not answer. He simply activated the system and left. The conditioning began immediately. Images flashed on the walls at frequencies calculated to bypass conscious processing and interface directly with my limbic system, the Emperor. The chapter iconography. Xenospecies designated as threats, traitors, heretics, categories of death, acceptable targets. Between the images, audio played, litanies, catechisms, tactical doctrine, historical battles. The audio never stopped. I could not close my eyes. Stimulants injected through the chair kept me conscious and alert. I could not look away. The images surrounded me on all walls. I could not think. The information input was overwhelming, designed to be overwhelming, designed to fill every cognitive process with chapter doctrine until nothing else remained. I lost track of time. The catalepsian node allowed me to rest portions of my brain while the conditioning continued, but I never fully lost consciousness. Days blurred into each other, or weeks, or months. I counted my heartbeats, both hearts, but lost count at numbers that no longer had meaning. The conditioning became my reality. The Emperor was absolute, the chapter was eternal. My purpose was to serve, to kill, to die if required. These were not beliefs. These were fundamental architecture, the foundation everything else was built on. When they finally released me from the chair, I could not stand immediately. My legs had atrophied despite the stimulants. I had lost 11 kilograms. My skin was pale from lack of circulation. But my mind was exactly what they wanted it to be. I knew every litany without conscious recall. I could recite chapter history without accessing specific memories. I knew what I was. Cale Merrison no longer existed. In his place was Aspirant 07, Cale, awaiting final designation. I saw Davin when we were assembled for the final evaluation. He had undergone the same conditioning. His eyes had the same flat quality I knew mine must have. We looked at each other and I observed that recognition was still present. I knew him. He knew me. We had survived together. But the emotional weight that knowledge should have carried was absent. He was fellow component, parallel unit. Brother. In the technical sense, the chapter used the term, not in the sense I had understood before. The final evaluation was combat trial. We were given basic power armor, not the full Astartes plate we would eventually wear, but training variants designed to test our black carapace integration. I felt the armor connect to my nervous system through the ports in my skin. The sensation was intimate and wrong simultaneously. The armor's weight distributed across my reinforced skeleton. Its servos synchronized with my muscle movements. Its sensors fed data directly into my enhanced vision and hearing. I took a step. The armor moved with me. I took another step. The armor was not something I was wearing. It was something I was becoming part of. They placed us in a combat arena and deployed training servitors armed with shock weapons set to lethal parameters. The instruction was simple: survive, kill, demonstrate competency. The servitors attacked immediately. I moved without thinking. The conditioning had programmed responses deeper than conscious thought. I identified threats. I prioritized targets. I killed efficiently. The first servitor fell to a strike that crushed its chest cavity. The second I disabled by removing its leg at the knee joint. The third I killed by hand, my armored fingers penetrating its skull. I registered that these servitors had been human once. I registered that I was killing things shaped like people. I registered that I felt nothing about this. The conditioning had succeeded. Davin fought with the same efficiency. Marcus fought. The other three fought. We all survived. We all killed. We were tested for 6 hours. Waves of servitors, different weapon configurations, environmental hazards introduced into the arena. We adapted. We overcame. We demonstrated that the Imperium's investment in our transformation had produced functional assets. When the trial ended, we were assembled before the chapter master. I had never seen him before. A fully transformed Astartes in Terminator plate that made him appear 3 meters tall. His face was scarred, ancient, inhuman. He looked at the 6 of us, the only survivors of Intake Group 07, Alpha, and spoke with a voice that resonated through augmented vocal systems. You are no longer aspirants. You have endured transformation. You have proven worthwhile. You will serve the Emperor as Space Marines of this chapter. Your designations are now Battle Brother. Your lives are no longer your own. They belong to him. We were given our final designations. I was Battle Brother Cale of the 7th Company, Tactical Squad Tertius. Davin was Battle Brother Davin of the 7th Company, Tactical Squad Tertius. We had been assigned to the same squad. I observed this and felt something that the conditioning had not completely erased. Relief, not happiness. Not joy, just relief that the one connection that still registered as significant had not been severed. The ceremony concluded. We were dismissed to receive our full armor and weapons. I was fitted with Mark 7 power armor, ceramite plate that integrated with my black carapace perfectly. The armor was painted in chapter colors, black with silver trim. My pauldron bore the chapter icon. My helmet was shaped like a skull. I looked at my reflection in the armory's polished surface and saw a space marine. I did not see Cale Merrison. That person was archived data. In his place stood a weapon that could think. Our first deployment came 6 weeks after completion. We were assigned to a compliance action on a world designated 447. Tertius. The population had refused imperial tithe. This was categorized as rebellion. The solution was categorized as pacification. We deployed via drop pod, a violent insertion that shook my armor and compressed my reinforced skeleton. When the pod opened, we emerged into a city that was burning. Other squads had preceded us. Civilian casualties were already extensive. My orders were clear. Advance to grid reference 447. Alpha, eliminate all resistance. Secure the administrative complex. I advanced. Davin advanced beside me. The rest of our squad spread in tactical formation. We encountered resistance at the third intersection. Local militia armed with autoguns and improvised explosives. They fired. The rounds impacted my armor and did nothing. I returned fire with my bolter. The mass reactive rounds detonated inside soft human bodies. The militia died in pieces. We advanced over their remains. The administrative complex was defended by PDF troopers, better equipped, better trained, but still baseline human. They established defensive positions and fired with disciplined volleys. It did not matter. We were space marines. We were post-human weapons deployed against humans. The outcome was predetermined. I killed 14 PDF troopers in the assault on the complex. Davin killed 11. Our squad suffered no casualties. We secured the complex in 47 minutes. The resistance was eliminated. The world was compliant. During the assault, I killed a PDF trooper who was wounded and attempting to surrender. He raised his hands. He said something, words I could hear but did not process. My training, my conditioning, my purpose did not include processing surrender from targets designated as hostile. I fired. He died. I moved to the next target. The incident was logged in my combat recorder for post-action analysis. No disciplinary action was taken. The kill was within parameters. We remained on 447 Tertius for 3 weeks, conducting pacification operations across multiple cities. The casualty estimates for the civilian population were not shared with us. We were not involved in civilian processing. That was handled by Imperial Guard and local collaborators. We simply killed designated targets and secured designated positions. I performed this function efficiently. I received commendations for kill count and tactical performance. On the transport returning to our fleet base, Davin asked me a question. We were alone in the armor maintenance bay, performing post-mission rituals. "Do you remember what we were?" he asked. I looked at him. His face was scarred now, burns from a promethium explosion during the campaign. His eyes were the enhanced oculobe replacements, no longer the color I remembered from intake. I processed his question. "We were aspirants," I said. "Before that," he said, "I accessed archived memories, corrupted files, fragments. I was taken from a hive city." I said, "I had a mother. I remember that she existed. I do not remember her." Davin nodded. "I had a father. He was a smith. I remember the forge heat, but I don't remember him. Not his face, not his voice, just the heat." We completed our maintenance rituals in silence. I understood what Davin was trying to confirm. We still had access to the knowledge that we had been human. We could retrieve the data, but the emotional context, the significance of mothers and fathers and childhood and identity, was corrupted beyond recovery. We knew we had lost something. We could not remember what it had felt like to possess it. I have served for 43 years since completion. I have participated in 67 campaigns. I have killed enemies of the Imperium across 17 worlds and 4 ship-to-ship boarding actions. My confirmed kill count is 2,847, not including casualties from orbital bombardments I assisted with targeting. I have received 14 commendations for valor. I have been wounded 42 times. I have died once. My sus and membrane activated during a plasma weapon strike that should have been lethal. I was recovered and revived. Davin served for 31 years. He died during a boarding action against an Orc cruiser in the Viridia system. An Orc war boss crushed his helmet and skull with a power claw. I was 3 meters away. I saw it happen. I killed the war boss immediately afterward, placed my combat knife through its eye and into its brain. This was not revenge. This was tactical necessity. The war boss was a priority target, but I killed it because it had killed Davin, and some portion of my conditioning-resistant consciousness still registered that as significant. I retrieved Davin's gene seed after the battle. This is protocol. The gene seed must be harvested from fallen brothers so it can be implanted in the next generation of aspirants. I opened his chest with my combat knife and removed the organs. They were still warm. I placed them in stasis containers and delivered them to the apothecary. Davin's genetic material would continue serving the chapter in another body. This was efficient. This was proper. This was what he had been designed for. I did not grieve. I do not grieve. Grief is an emotional process my conditioning has suppressed. But I archive the loss. Battle Brother Davin of the 7th Company, Tactical Squad Tertius. Service duration 30 to 1 years. Confirmed kills 1,923. Status KIA, gene seed recovered. He is data in my records. The only person who remembered what I had been before transformation is now data in my records. I continue to serve. I train new battle brothers who have just completed their transformation. I see them arrive with the same flat eyes I know I possess. I see them struggle with the gap between what they know they were and what they have become. I do not tell them it gets easier. It does not get easier. You simply stop noticing that it is difficult. The conditioning continues to function. The purpose continues to define existence. You kill what you are ordered to kill. You survive what you are capable of surviving. You die when the Imperium requires your death. This is what we are. I am Battle Brother Kale of the 7th Company. I am 83 years old. 62 of those years have been spent as a Space Marine. 21 years were spent becoming a Space Marine. 9 years were spent being human. I have vague memories of snow. I have corrupted memories of a hand letting go. Everything else is function and purpose and archived combat data. The Imperium took 43 boys. It killed 37 of them during transformation. It converted 6 of them into weapons. Those weapons have served efficiently. One of those weapons is still serving. I am that weapon. I remember that I used to be a person. I cannot remember what being a person felt like. The data is corrupted. The file is incomplete. I continue to function. This is what remains. The Emperor protects, they told us. I logged the protection parameters. 86% of us were not protected. We were consumed. The 14% that survived consumption became instruments of further consumption. We deployed to worlds that refused compliance, and we killed until compliance was achieved. The Imperium protects itself by converting everything it touches into extensions of itself. I was converted. I am an extension. I protect the Imperium by destroying its enemies. This is efficient. This is what I was designed for. I do not question. The conditioning removed my capacity to question. I simply observe. I archive. I testify to what the process cost, even though I no longer feel the weight of what was lost. Somewhere in my corrupted memory files, there is a boy who tasted snow. He does not exist anymore. His genetic material was reformed into something that serves. His consciousness was reformatted into something that obeys. His humanity was extracted and discarded as inefficiency. What remains is Battle Brother Kale, weapon, tool, component of the Imperium's eternal machine. This is what it costs to create a Space Marine. This is what I paid. This is what they all paid. The ones who died paid with their lives. The ones who survived paid with everything else. I continue to serve. I will serve until I am killed. My gene seed will be harvested. It will be implanted in another aspirant. He will endure what I endured. He will lose what I lost. He will become what I became. The cycle continues. The Imperium requires warriors. The process that creates them requires everything. I am testimony to that requirement. The Emperor protects. I observe that this is true only if you define protection as conversion into instruments of his will. I have been protected in that sense. I have been preserved as functional asset. The boy I was received no protection. He was consumed completely. Not even his name remains in any meaningful sense. Cale Merrison died in stages across 7 years of surgical transformation. Battle Brother Cale was constructed from his remains. I am what the Imperium creates when it needs weapons that can think. I am what humanity becomes when it is processed through the machine of eternal war. I am testimony. I am evidence. I am the cost made manifest. And I continue to serve.